Welcome back. So I added a new test helper. You can go and check it out. It's called Location Repository Test Helper. It's very simple. It's placed where we should place all our helpers now. Down here, it's under the repositories, and of course we're going to make more as we move forward. Also generic ones, just to make it easier to kind of reuse some of these things in here. Now, it's just very simple repository test helper right here. All you do is you can get a valid repository that has a context inside it, or you get a location repository where you can pass in the context from the outside. Now, the cool thing with this guy is I can now start mocking this guy and pass only the mocked part into the repository. So that's kind of neat. Let's try and actually see how we use it. Now again, I went in here and I added two helpers now that I'm using inside the location repository, and I went down and I used them for different things. You can go and check out the code, basic stuff. The final one I want to talk about in this class is this guy, and that's actually this mock right here, where we're going to create this context, and I want to do it as a mock this time and pass it into the location repository because I actually want to verify the add function was called. We built this 2 lessons ago, but I kind of want to just explain this because we have a problem with this, even though it might look like it's working, right? So what's actually happening is I go and I make a valid location, I pass that valid location into the add function on the repo, and I verify that that repo is calling the add function on the context. Let's look at the production code, just to talk about that for a second. It ends up looking something like this. The add function sends in the location again, and that location is now being called on our beautiful egg production DB context. We call the add function on that guy, and everything looks fine. No, you don't have any errors right here. Everything seems to work, but that's because you actually have some generic work right here. What actually happens behind the scene is that when the context calls the generic add function, it automatically tries to find the type of database set called location. Now, what is a database set? In the DB context, the Entity Framework core uses the DbSet to actually explain you have a table of type location. You have a table of type pet. You have a table of type chicken, right? You'll have different types in your system. So that's kind of what the DbSet is all about. And right now we haven't specified any DbSets, so we cannot actually find that. So if I was running this now in a production environment, I would actually fail, and that would mean that I could solve this in different ways. I could do an integration test that would show that this is not working yet, but I can actually also do a test driven, and that's what we're going to do this lesson right here to kind of prove and fix this issue right here. Now, just to give you the solution before I show you how to do a test driven, let's try and jump into the egg production right here. This is the solution. As soon as the DbSet is available as a property called locations, everything will work. And we could just make it like this and say we're happy. But if anybody at some point did this, things were bad again, right? So let's fix this now. Jumping into our location, into the egg production DB context test, I made a new one. Egg production DB context should have DbSet with locations. Makes sense. So let's start out by just making a new egg production context right here. Now we just do this. Context.locations. Now notice the locations aren't there. Should. Oh, and we can't do should because we don't have locations yet. So let's go and create that locations. I'll just create a property locations in the context right now. And you'll notice it's pretty much this guy we end up with. Let's put that in there. So now we have that DbSet available, but I'm not quite satisfied yet. Now we know it's there, right? But I also want to make sure, if I go back to the code right here, the test, I want to make sure that when I have that location, just like here, it should be assignable to a DbSet location. Notice how simple it is to kind of do this test driven. Now let's run the unit test, and again you can notice they are running all the time because I have this set up to run all the time. And when we look at the context, now we have that available as well. Now I know that was a small thing right here, but again let's try and just do a final explanation about the DB context and how that set actually works. The add function, when you call that add function right here on the context, behind the scenes what's happening is it says, again, I'm looking for a location DbSet. So in reality and in some of the older versions of the Entity Framework core, you could only do this. You could only say, I'm looking for the locations, and that locations right here is just the DbSet or the table when we're talking SQL. Now it says, I want to add to that SQL table right here, right? So it does that for you, but they kind of made a lot of great features if you just go manually and just say, I just want to add the location. And then automatically the framework will figure out what's the type you want to add. So that's the one we want to use. We also just need to be sure that our DB context knows about this or else we will break later on. Now I'll talk a little bit about testing next lesson, where we kind of dive into different types of ways to test the context compared to what we're trying to do right here. But now we have the locations available and we're happy. And next lesson, trust me, we'll try and actually test that we are adding to the DB context, even though we're not doing that for real in an integration test. See you next time. Have fun.